And there was a lot. There was maybe like 30 or 40 other artists, and a lot of artists didn't understand like why they were even in that show, because they didn't think that they did hot rod art. And I guess they didn't. Like some cartoonists, I remember like the Hernandez brothers were cartoonists, and they didn't understand why they were there, but they were there because kind of like that was maybe like the custom culture art, and maybe they were like comic art, and comic art was just sort of some more ignored art that wasn't getting shown, but seemed like it was related, you know, to the car art. And there was other artists that didn't so much do hot rod related art, but they did, you know, representational and like really, you know, visual art. And they were younger, and it seemed like there was kind of like this new school of art that was taking place in LA. So we wanted to include like that whole new movement, which is what Juxtaposed magazine, you know, sort of came out and started documenting all these people that didn't totally fit into the car thing so much. Back when we did the show, I sort of pushed for, like I wanted to have a fourth artist in the show. It was supposed to be Robert Williams and Rick Griffin. But at the time, Rick Griffin had died, and the wife had, you know, control over the estate, and she told me she didn't want him to be a big part of the show. That it was okay if we mentioned him as a small part of the show, and she had me, you know, like run everything by her and approve what was in there. So we got just a small amount in there. So instead of it being the 4 artists, it ended up just being the 3 artists. And he was, you know, he liked hot rods and cars too, but he was more of, I guess I saw the hot rods and cars relating to the surfing world as well. And I just knew he was a big popular artist that should have a museum show. So, but anyway, he just got to be, you know, equal with all the other people.
Okay.
Yeah, I've definitely seen artists by works done by Japanese artists. What's that one? Makoto?
Makoto.
Makoto, yeah. Maybe he's the one I've seen the most of. Just that they really seem to get the whole custom culture aesthetic and do it as good or better than anyone else, you know? I think he's pretty right on doing it that way. You know, there's other people that are right up there, but maybe they're not so from the car art world or something like that. I don't know. Well, to me, kind of the next stage of custom culture was really Juxtaposed magazine, and seeing what Juxtaposed magazine went and documented, because I liked the art from custom culture, but I didn't see it as just, you know, an end to itself, like only hot rod art, you know, but definitely a less theoretical and intellectualized art. So I see it sort of branching out, and where people make it like their own interpretations of it, you know. And I'll give you an example. Okay, like when we had the custom culture, there was a panel discussion, and we had, you know, all those artists, and I think we had Gilbert Luan on the panel too, who was, you know, a Chicano Latino artist that credited a lot of this as his Chicano art. So anyway, we had this panel discussion, and in that audience of that panel discussion was Paul Frank, you know, who makes the clothing. And Paul Frank, you know, was very influenced by Big Daddy Roth and Von Dutch and Williams and all that, but he didn't want to just start imitating a Rat Fink, you know, or imitating what Williams does, or even imitating what Von Dutch does. So he, you know, but he liked the idea of sort of art for the masses, a more accessible art, and so you know, he started a clothing company and came up with that monkey on the wallet, you know. And so maybe even Robert Williams, you know, who was all like underground and some severe, you know, X-rated type art type of things, you know, might not have thought that he was, you know, that good of an artist. But to me, he was a great artist because he came up with a great image. It was wildly successful in the same way that Roth would get his stuff out there on clothes and t-shirts, but instead of just aiming at like the car culture or something like that, you know, he aimed at like, the teenage girl market, which was, to me, that was real genius. Some guy that was influenced by Ed Roth and custom culture, but then coming up with this whole new way to do it and getting this whole new generation of people. And a lot of those people, there's a lot of that custom culture aesthetic, really, that's really in Paul Frank. And he'll admit, and he's a big fan of Roth, and has like his collection and hat and all that stuff, but he just didn't want, he couldn't really just do the same thing and be in their shadow, so he came up with like a whole new thing. He was just in the audience. At that time, he was an unknown guy.
Okay.
He was just there as a fan,
Right.
Being influenced. And that's what I was hoping that show would do, is that show would have an influence that if he was at a normal intellectual arts show, maybe things would have been different, but somehow this show happened. And there might be other people. This one guy was there, he was maybe a young kid at the time, and he was just sopping it all up. And then subsequently, he came up with a new design for a t-shirt that didn't really have anything to do with that, but was wildly popular, and there's an attribution there that a lot of people don't really know. A lot of people see Paul Frank and they don't think that he was influenced by Big Daddy Roth and custom culture, but he really was. So I see the direction sort of going like that way, in these areas where there's influence, but not the exact same thing rehashed.